Welcome to Funding and Disrupting, the most in-depth business podcast for companies looking to raise money and the investors who fund them. Every episode, we interview a funded founder, plus the investor who funded them, to get the real story of how it all came together. If you're searching for funding for a disruptive technology or business, or you're searching for the best companies to invest in, then you've come to the right place. This episode of Funding and Disrupting is brought to you by Aura Collective, a leading tech PR and marketing firm. Let's get funding and disrupting.
Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Keith Herman, and welcome to today's interview on Funding and Disrupting. Today, we are excited to invite our first female guest. She is an entrepreneur and democratizing access to fertility care by developing safe, affordable treatments that can be carried out at home. The company is Bea Fertility, most recently founded in January 2020, and even more recently funded to the tune of 800,000 euros in a venture seed round. So let's welcome our lovely guest, Tess Cosad. How are you today, Tess?
Hi, Keith. Thank you for the introduction. It's really nice to be here.
Well, we're excited to have you here. And as I'm sure you know, and the audience, it's very uncommon to have women founders in the space of technology. So we're really grateful for you here, being here and sharing your story. And hopefully it'll empower many other women to pursue their ideas and dreams.
Of course.
So there's quite a few things that we want to cover. And I want to start with a fascinating tidbit of your past. A few years back, you were a research analyst for the UCL MSL Astrophysics Laboratory. You were using data from the Hubble telescope to analyze X-ray emissions from galaxy superclusters, searching for and analyzing physical characteristics of these superclusters for the purposes of scientific research. Wow, that is truly remarkable.
That is a very fancy way of saying that when I was 17 in school, I loved astrophysics, and my teacher got me an internship at a lab that happened to have a professor working in the lab who was using Hubble telescope imagery to look at the way X-rays behave in galaxy superclusters. So I was assigned to work with him, and really that's an extremely sort of fancy way of saying that I spent my whole day in a dark room looking at images of the galaxy, desperately hunting for what might be a galaxy supercluster so I could show it to him and he could either tell me whether I'd gotten it or not. And that was it.
That's incredible. And I'll tell you, the reason why I mentioned that is because I love astrophysics and cosmology, and tune into all sorts of shows about that. And even there was one episode I think I saw of a series where an intern actually found a planet. So
very cool.
Yeah, so really, really fascinating stuff there. I couldn't help but touch upon it because not just anybody would sign up for that.
It's I mean, it's definitely one of my first and most significant sort of life-changing failures, I think, was falling in love with astrophysics, but not quite having the strength I needed in math to see it through. So I got into university to pursue that path, and I was so excited about it. And really, I should have never been on that course. I sort of made it, a few weeks in, and then realized that, hey, do you know what? This is maybe not my path. It's a passion, but maybe not my career. And so thankfully, the business school let me in, and I went over to what the physicists call the dark side.
Well, it's certainly fascinating stuff. And thank you for sharing that with us. So let's fast forward to Bea Fertility. Bea is democratizing access to fertility care by developing safe, affordable treatments that can be carried out at home. Tell us how you came up with this idea.
So my co-founder, David, and I came together at a point in time when he'd been sort of mulling over and prototyping and working on something that would help people conceive at home, because he's a clinical embryologist. And so he saw a bunch of people coming into the lab on a regular basis where he thought, you guys are maybe not quite ready for IVF, or there's something you could do at home, or, as is all too common and heartbreaking with clinical treatment, people run out of money, and they were sort of saying, what can we do? And there was nothing. And so he was sort of prototyping and mulling over and thinking, there's got to be something I can do. And at the point at which we met, he sort of had something, and he thought, you know what, I think I've got something. I think this is something we could do something with. And I'd been, for obvious reasons with my background, I'd always been fascinated by tech, and I'd spent the last few years working in sex tech. So I was very plugged into, what I believe.
What exactly is that?
Sex tech is anything that sits at the intersection of sex and technology. And
okay. Augmented reality, virtual reality,
absolutely,
or consumer-facing goods, all of the above.
Absolutely. If you buy a sex toy that can talk to an app and be controlled remotely, that's sex tech.
Okay. What if it talks to your partner?
Tech, but maybe in a different way.
Oh, okay.
It probably, there's someone somewhere will invent that. If they haven't, they will now. But it's, there's so many positive uses for this, and there are so many incredible ways that those two fields can be merged for the good of people everywhere. And I fell in with the Women of Sex Tech in New York, and there were so many incredible people working on so many incredible ideas that were basically designed to help women have better, intimate lives, safer intimate lives, you name it. And I was so passionate about that, and I was so sort of consumed by anything that would make the lives of women, but more broadly humans, better. And so that was really the point in my life at which I met David, and I saw what he had, and I thought, God, you know what, this is the most incredible thing, and we've got a chance to help people. Infertility is heartbreaking, it's horrible, and it's so exclusive, it's so expensive, it's so out of reach of so many people. And yet it's such a fundamental right, the right to start your family, the right to grow your family. You would think that we would make it a priority that everyone can access that, and yet we don't. And so I saw in this prototype, in this technology, I saw the opportunity to really bring the fertility clinic home and to break open a sector of medicine that is so exclusive and so privatized. And so I couldn't wait to get started. And that was about 1.5 years ago.
Now, when the two of you were discussing this idea, is this something that you just bounced off of each other, or is it something where there was more of a process to it, where you said, let's start getting some feedback from other people? What was your process like?
That's a good question. I met David at prototype stage, and then really the ideas just started to mushroom from there. It should be, what else can we bring out of the fertility clinic and bring into the home environment? It should be a solution. There should be other things. We should make it a kit. We should include ovulation and pregnancy tests. It should be subscription. People should be able to try again and again. And so there's always sort of new things coming in. We've just brought on board a third co-founder who's brilliant, and with him we launched our first digital health experience, digital product, yesterday afternoon. So there's sort of always things that we're laying into it. I think the process is actually an interesting one, because the device that we have, it's funny, the innovation in what we're doing is, it's not sort of cutting edge, super high tech, incredibly new stuff. It's actually, in a way, this sort of really beautiful way of innovating, which is to look at things that used to exist before in a clinical setting and figure out if maybe there's a way we can bring those things back and put them directly into people's hands at home.
So why don't you tell us, fill us in exactly what you're doing, how you're doing it, and why it's different, and the aspect of technology to it.
I sometimes realize I'm so in it, I forget to explain what we're actually.
Yeah, well, I almost forgot myself, but.
So essentially, it is intracervical insemination. So intracervical insemination is a method of artificial insemination that basically involves holding semen against the cervix for an extended amount of time. And usually that's done with a cap or some kind of barrier. So it's called ICI. So ICI, if you went into a clinic, a fertility clinic, anytime before the mid-70s, ICI was pretty much all you could get. In the mid-70s, as a result of IVF sort of really advancing, scientists in a lab were able to extract healthy sperm cells out of a semen sample. And the minute they can do that, they can inject semen directly into the uterus, bypassing the cervix. And so the minute that became possible, suddenly a whole new treatment category became possible called intrauterine insemination, IUI. So IUI completely took over. ICI was really sort of put down and eventually just not offered at all. And I think the reason that shift happened is because ICI is not enormously profitable for fertility clinics to offer. You know, the couple presents in clinic in the morning, man produces sample, a cap is containing the semen sample is inserted into the vaginal canal, and then the female patient has to wait with the cap in place pretty much all day, or at least until the physician has time to remove it. It's not really efficient for clinics to offer that, because the biggest single constraining factor of a clinic's ability to scale is their physical footprint. They just don't have that many treatment rooms. And so to have one treatment room filled with a bunch of women with caps in place was just not, you know, an economical business model. So when IUI became a viable treatment, of course it took over. The problem for people is that IUI is 5 times the price of ICI, because it's a lot more invasive. It requires a lab to wash semen. It requires inserting a catheter and bypassing the cervix, which is a medical procedure that's highly invasive. And as a result, IUI, which is now the world's most popular fertility treatment, is anywhere from 800 to 2,000 pounds for a single cycle if you're in the UK looking for fertility treatment. And for most people, that's just not affordable. So ICI, around 2018, a couple of peer-reviewed scientific papers came out, and a Cochrane review came out saying that there's really not enough evidence to suggest that IUI is any more effective than ICI. And so that's the point at which, you know, my co-founder was sort of looking around and looking at the literature, and it just became obvious that the thing to do was to bring ICI back, and to bring it back in a way that made evidence-based fertility treatment affordable and accessible at home. And that's sort of how it came to be.
So now we talked a little bit about your background, and obviously you're, you know, a very scientific and a very creative person. So what is it, when you see yourself as an entrepreneur, what do you think as an entrepreneur your biggest challenge is?
That's an excellent question. I think it's very generous to say I'm scientific. I'm definitely very creative. I think the challenge, as any founder will tell you, you know, particularly any first-time founder, is that, you know, there's a reason you're called a first-time founder. It's usually the first time you're going through building and scaling a company, and it's the first time that you're making all of these decisions. And so it's easy to sort of get lost in how difficult each decision is, and try to sort of get as much information as possible. The unfortunate thing about that is that you've probably got about 100 decisions to make a day. So if you went in depth into every single one of them, you'd never sleep when you're already not sleeping enough. So I think one of the challenges is sort of knowing when enough is enough. You know, perfect is really the enemy of done, and knowing when you have enough information to make a decision, making that decision and moving on from it. I think the key as a founder is to just execute quickly, and it takes practice, which obviously takes doing. And so it's a little chicken and egg. And I would say that if you sprinkled some sort of confidence on top of that, it gets a lot easier. But it's definitely, you know, executing and having the confidence that you're making those decisions and you're making the right ones for your business. It's definitely something I struggle with.
Well, you'll learn in time, and you'll learn more from mistakes and pivoting. So
exactly.
I think that's kind of at the core of every entrepreneur. So I think that's great that you're aware of that. Let's pivot now to the recent fundraising seed round that you closed.
Mm-hmm.
How did you decide who to approach as a potential investor?
This is a great question. Because
when you're going to go out and fundraise, right? You could say, well, I'm going to, ask my cousins, I'm going to ask friends and family, I'm going to reach out to, ask people for advice. I mean, there's all different places. I mean, did you have an idea of who you were going to target? What was that process like? Because, the show is, and the people who are listening to the interviews are people like yourself who are thinking, okay, how do I do this? Right. So share with us what your process was of how you decided who to target.
So the interesting thing about fundraising is no one's ever, we're not born knowing how to raise capital. And yet when you go out and raise capital as in a pre-seed round, you're sort of expected by the investment community to know exactly what's going on. So, and I think in the media, we always hear about founders closing rounds, and we hear all of the success stories around, hey, look how great we are. We raised X million dollars to do this. We never really hear about founders opening rounds, and we never really hear about that moment where you sit down and you go, what am I doing? And so I will put my hand up and I will absolutely admit I downloaded Brad Feld's book on Audible and I listened to it 4 times.
Okay.
Just had it on repeat because you have to learn. You have to gain. It's like a completely new language. So step 1 is gaining fluency in the language. What are all these terms? What do they mean? How do I at least sound like I know what I'm doing? The second thing is, I think there's a tendency to want to approach everybody. I cannot I can't understate rather how poor an approach that is, because every fund has a thesis and every partner who runs every fund has experienced different problems in their lives. For us with fertility, that's not something a lot of people talk about. So it's really tough to kind of cruise LinkedIn and Twitter and find out who we could target because VCs aren't exactly tweeting from the IVF clinic. What I will say is, look, I started building a pipeline and building a list of investors I could go to. And then
what were they? What did you have in mind when you created that list? Did you say, I'm only going to go after people that are in biotech, or I'm only going to go after people in, what did that look like? What was your thought process?
So it was a Google Doc, a Google Sheet pinned to my browser that I pretty much lived in for 6 months. I went out and I just started I first started looking for VCs in London, angel groups in London, and you just start by Googling. I didn't have the luxury of a friends and family round. I just had to go straight to people who I didn't know. And so...
And you felt that doing it geographically would be easier?
So interestingly, no, but I wanted to start there. I wanted to start there because a lot of US funds don't necessarily at a pre-seed level invest internationally. They tend to like companies to establish themselves in Europe before they'll look at investing in international corporate structures. And I honestly was naive about the European VC scene. I pitched a couple of French VCs because I'm half French, and for some reason, I just thought, you know what, I'm going to focus on London first and focus on, second, the UK more broadly. We had the luxury of pitching during COVID. So I would often sit on Zoom with 100 people in the audience, but it's great because they're little tiles and you don't, you're not on stage. So sort of raising during COVID, really hard. And everyone put their capital in a holding pattern when the first lockdown started. So it was really hard. We opened around at the worst time. Equally, I would sometimes have 5 to 7 to 10 pitch calls in a day. You're never doing that unless it's virtual because you're actually going to all of those locations.
Right.
I think I started by looking at lists of VCs in London. I targeted geographically. That led me down a rabbit hole on Twitter where you start to find people in threads who, VCs do really live there. So you can find partners. Where I went after that was I sort of gathered a spreadsheet of initial sort of names. And I had a couple of contacts from my sex tech background. All you really need is one friendly VC who believes in your mission and believes in you. They will make warm intros, and those warm intros are gold. Even if they're not interested, they'll make connections. So you've just got to try and figure out, if you aren't already connected to someone in some way, is your mission important enough to you and to them that you can get them to give you an intro? Because the minute you have that intro, you can start your process and you're going. Once I had my spreadsheet, I started stripping out the ones. So, it's also, well, you start with everyone because
how long was your list? How many people were ultimately on that list, do you think?
It grew over time, but before I got it to a place of about 150. Okay. And then I started thinking, so we're direct to consumer, and we're also a medically regulated product. So we basically take the worst risks of the best parts of building a business. So medical regulation and all of the go-to-market risk of a D2C company. And we take those two things and we mash them together. But very few people will actually support and invest in that. And so it was a question of going through my list of 150 and just cutting out anyone whose thesis didn't fit, or who, from a risk profile perspective, if they say we only invest in B2B SaaS, get them out. If they say, we invest in digital health, there's no point in pitching, because they're digital and we were very much hardware. So you just start stripping them out. And then that left me with a short list. And somebody once told me, I'm not going to claim credit for this advice, it's not mine. They said, have three groups: the people you really don't want money from, the people that you'd be okay if you got money from them, and the people you really want to come in and invest in your round. A, B, C. Pitch all of the C's first, because chances are your first pitch is going to be awful. So waste it on the C's. Then go to the A's. And the reason you go to the A's next is because the minute you've perfected your pitch on the C's, you're rolling. You've got so much momentum. And then the B's can sort of follow on, because they'll likely want to follow the A's anyway, because the A's have the conviction in your mission. And that's just how I did it.
That's great advice that you received. So let's talk about how you met your lead investor. Do you remember that moment when you...
I do.
Okay, so why don't you tell us briefly? Yeah, tell us how you met them and what that initial meeting was like. And you met them virtually, correct?
Yeah, we did. I haven't met in person anyone on my cap table.
Okay.
Yeah. So our lead investor, after I've just said that we ousted the digital health companies, our lead investor is a digital health VC who we'd been raising for quite a while. And there had been a few hurdles in the intervening period and a few things that had sort of maybe not gone our way. And it was at a real pivot point for the business where we were starting to think, is this the right thing? If it's this hard, is it right? And then I got an email from a VC that does digital health. And I thought, oh, here we go. And asking to schedule a call. It's like, okay, sure, get on a call. And immediately, these two guys who are, with these crazy Zoom backgrounds were like, you're in health. Why haven't we heard of you? I was like, well, I don't know. I haven't heard of you either. So there was this sort of mutual ships in the night. And I think, honestly, within 3 weeks, they were like, yep, we're in, we're leading, close it out. We're going to lead. We're going to move it on. Close it out. Quit raising. This is your last.
How many calls did you have back and forth?
I had 2 calls with them. And then they had one with my co-founder, one with me, one with us together. And then that was it. A lot of WhatsApping.
Right. So basically just kind of this fortuitous thing that just happened, spur of the moment, within a couple of calls. The next thing you know, your dream is
pretty much
on its way.
I think it's, this may not be relevant to all founders that you interview, but as a woman, when you have to stand up in front of a largely male investing audience and talk about an insemination device that's designed to be inserted into a vagina, you very quickly understand who is capable of having those conversations and sitting on your cap table and who just isn't comfortable enough. And these guys were so comfortable. It was such a pleasure to have the conversations that we had with them. And so I just knew.
Now, how easy was it, the process of getting it closed? So you had some conversations and then they said, okay, send us the paperwork. And now you have to kind of get into the nitty gritty of it to get it done. And they're your lead investor. So they're leading the round. Obviously, they're going to want to lead what the conditions are, which, potentially could affect future rounds. So what was that like?
It was an interesting process. You become a corporate lawyer after a few negotiation rounds. It's,
by the way, why don't we tell everybody who your lead investor was?
Comstorm, a European VC who invest in, she says, digital health. But we are at the moment a product business, but there is a digital play here. And they saw that, and they saw that so clearly that it made so much sense for them to lead, and they really bought the vision.
Now, who do you communicate with there? You said that you initially met with two gentlemen, correct?
Yes, correct.
So what's your communication with them? You had a few calls, but now moving forward, what type of how would you describe your relationship with them?
Very good and very informal. There's the managing partner, Lucanus, and the investment manager, Andre. Most of our calls when we were in due diligence were with Lucanus. Andre and I would have a lot of calls about our financial model. He went away and made some edits, which when an investor takes your financial model and makes edits is very scary as a founder, but it came back showing higher revenues, which I took as a good sign. So he and I had a lot of financial conversations. Today, I would say that I speak quite frequently with Andre. He's a really valuable source of advice. We will communicate through email, WhatsApp, whatever I need a quick response on, he's always there, which is great. Lucanus is, if I email him, he's equally available, and he's forever sending connections my way, which is incredible. He's very present in board meetings. And from time to time, we'll all get on a call if there's something that we're struggling with. They're really good at helping us figure stuff out.
Looking back on the fundraising journey.
Not my favorite thing.
Perfect, because what I was going to ask you is, how do you feel from the start of the fundraising process? Did you think that it wasn't going to be a problem? Did you have anxiety? What were some of the things that that you felt at the beginning, and then now looking back that you may dispel? Because obviously for first time fundraisers, this is pretty valuable, right? Because I'm going to let you speak on it, but just why don't you share with us kind of how you felt going in, and then looking back, how you would describe it.
I think there's fundraising. It is really emotional. Pitching, you put heart and soul into pitching, and even when it's virtual, you get a little nervous, or you're being judged on your vision. On people are saying yes or no to giving you money, but what they're really saying is, I back you, or I don't back you. And you have to put that aside when you're fundraising, because it's a sales process. You have a spreadsheet, you have leads, you have where they are in your funnel, and they will say no. A lot of people will say no to you, a lot. And you have to be able to separate the fact that they've just said no, you move on and you pitch somebody else, from, oh my God, they don't back me or my business, what am I going to do? So I think you very quickly develop a thick skin. I would say that I went into it on a high thinking, this is going to be so great. How exciting, the next phase of our business. And you're sort of up here, and then you enter what I call the valley of despair. And the valley of despair has certain, minor peaks when you're in it. You pitch, you get a term sheet, you think, oh my God, great. And then the term sheet comes through and it's horrible and you can't take it. So, there are various peaks in the valley of despair. And then there's just this pull, and then you sort of start to see the end in sight, and then you come out of it. And, there's some founders that fundraise brilliantly, and they're so structured, and they've got incredible stories. And, Forbes is always going to write the article about the startup that closed around in 3 days with 12 competing term sheets. We don't all get on a plane to San Francisco and have access to all of the big VCs with a B2B SaaS rocket ship that they're all interested in. So I sometimes think the stories that we hear and the stories that are glorified in the media tell us that it's going to be one way. And so we embark on this fundraising journey, and we learn the hard way that it isn't that way, that it's really hard work. It's sales. So I think that's what I would say there.
So what advice would you give to other female entrepreneurs that are looking to launch a project that requires a considerable amount of fundraising? Because, a lot of people initially, when they go out, they'll raise significantly less. But if you're going out and you're looking to raise, let's say, $1 million US, what advice would you give women?
So the advice I'd give to women is, there's sort of two sets of advice. I think if you are raising more than a small friends and family round, you're raising a bigger round, you need $1 million to get off the ground. You're going to, in the US, $1 million actually might be a friends and family round, but in Europe, that's a big round. In the UK and Europe, that's a big round. And so you're going to need institutional capital. One of the best pieces of advice I actually read randomly on a throwaway comment that someone must have not thought about typing. And I read it and thought, that's so true. Founders tend to go in and they pitch their product. Investors are not investing in the product, they're investing in the business. Pitch your business model, pitch your vision. Those are really the two things. Is this going where we think it could go, where it'll make us the returns it can? Does it have the business model to support that vision and that narrative? So focus on pitching those two things. Sure, describe the product. The product is, for want of a better word, a byproduct. They're really interested in business model, vision. And so I would say that, for anyone going into the room pitching, focus on that. Focus on the vision. The classic deck is, here's the problem, here's the solution, here's the team, here's the financials. Go in and talk about your vision. Like, yes, there's a problem, but your vision is the world that you see. And, pitch the world that you see and pitch why you and your company and your business model is the only way to get to that world and why that world is a great place to be. And I think for us, the pitch was really clear. A world in which everybody has the access they need to the fundamental right that should be the treatment to start your family. Everybody. And we're the right company to deliver that because X, and this is our idea, and these are our margins and the business model and everything. So I think I would say that, don't pitch your product, pitch your vision and your business model. I think that I would give that advice to all founders. Talking about women specifically, there's this is not an opinion. There's a huge amount of evidence and research, particularly from recruitment sectors, to suggest that men will pursue opportunities when they feel a little bit ready, or they are somewhat qualified, and women will pursue opportunities when they're like way overqualified and they're completely prepared and ready. You're never going to be qualified enough or ready enough to raise. Just go pitch. Like, if you have imposter syndrome, if you're struggling with confidence, there's so many resources out there that can help you. Use those, but just get out and do it. Like, feel the fear and go do it anyway, I think, is what I would say.
Like your list of 150, you needed to get through those first 50. Yeah. And that really gave you the confidence to get through the valley of despair, I think, as you described it.
Valley of despair by investors.
To get to the finish line. So Tess, tell us, how may our audience get in touch with you if they're interested in being a part of Bea Fertility as either an investor or a strategic partner, or even as a customer?
Of course. So you can find us online. We're beafertility.com. If you email hello@beafertility.com, you can find me. You can always DM us on Instagram, and there are many ways that you can reach out. But if hello@beafertility.com, we'll always pick it up.
Fantastic. Tess, thank you so much for sharing your time and your experience today. Your journey is certainly unique, and you're doing great work helping people start a family and create lifetime memories. So we wish you well and all the best in your endeavors.
Thank you so much. And thank you for letting me be here. This was lovely.
Terrific.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Funding and Disrupting. Don't forget to visit our sponsor, auraco.com, to learn more about working directly with Aura Collective's exclusive technology PR team. They'll help you craft your message, get noticed in the press, and help you get your venture to the funding finish line. Again, you can visit them at www.auraco.com. Keep funding and keep disrupting.